Hey seniors, this is one of your college advisors, Cynthia. So for today's senior workshop, I wanted to talk to you all about surviving your first year in college and provide you with some support and retention services. So first, I wanted to talk a little bit about retention and graduation. So the national average retention rate is actually 75%. What does this mean? This means that 25% of students who go in as freshmen do not return for their sophomore or second year. When it comes to graduation, the national average 6-year graduation rate for public universities is 60%, private universities 66, 21% at private for-profit universities, 63% for women, and 57% for men. Something I found really interesting was that Black and Hispanic students tend to graduate at a 20% rate lower than white and Asian students, which means that their graduation rate is at a 40% for public universities. Why are the statistics the way that they are? So a lot of people or a lot of students might say that it's academic, that they were not prepared to be at the university level, they're not smart enough. Well, that's actually not true. Most barriers are not academic. Most barriers that students come across have to do with their basic needs, such as housing, transportation, childcare, family responsibilities, and food security. So, if you encounter a barrier such as those and have a difficult time getting over it, it's not because you're not smart or you're not good enough. It's because there are a lot of different factors that can affect your academics. Does not mean that you're not smart enough. So, something I also wanted to mention, which is a really important topic that a lot of students encounter and a lot of them don't know what it is something called imposterism, or also known as imposter syndrome. So imposterism is the feeling that you don't belong, you feel like you don't have the skills, you're not smart enough to keep going with your studies, and when you look back at every accomplishment you've made, you feel like you don't deserve what you've accomplished. Something I found is that first generation college students are more likely to suffer from imposter syndrome in competitive STEM classroom environments. And not necessarily just STEM classroom environments, but first generation college students are more likely to suffer from imposter syndrome compared to any other college student. These imposter feelings can be associated with less engagement, lower attendance, so you can see a drop in going to classes. You will have more thoughts of dropping out, and it will result in lower course grades. So I'm going to show you a video about UCLA. They hit on a couple points of imposter syndrome and some things that they're doing to combat that and help first generation students.
Only 40% of first-generation college students make it to graduation.
We want our first generation students to thrive. We want them to feel like they belong here and that they're going to be here for 4 years through graduation.
University of California President Janet Napolitano.
Admissions are one thing, enrollment is one thing, but graduation is the thing.
But to succeed in a demanding academic environment like UCLA, the first-gen students have to overcome something called the imposter syndrome.
One of the definitions of imposter syndrome is students who worked really hard to get into campus, but they still are carrying with them like a sense that they don't truly belong, that at any moment someone's going to come and tap them on their shoulder and say, you know what, we made a mistake, right? For first generation scholars who are carrying with them imposter syndrome, you are not allowing yourself to thrive. Something as fundamental as saying, hey, I deserve to go to office hours every week if I want to. I deserve to have someone sort of sit down with me during their office hours and I can ask questions, right? One-on-one. I deserve that opportunity.
UCLA senior Violet Salazar knows what imposter syndrome feels like. Salazar helped create an entire dorm floor dedicated to incoming first-generation students after her own freshman experience proved difficult.
It was kind of hard to get to know people when you always felt like you were, I guess, lesser than them.
Because you're the first.
Because I am first gen, or because I am Latina, and also just coming from a very low socioeconomic background.
These are some
On the
of
day we
skills that
visited,
I
the
learned.
first generation dorm hosted a meeting led by student Clara Wynn, a first-gen student herself who also works with UCLA's mental health resources.
How do you practice resilience as a first generation student? It's really easy to get caught up in your failures, I feel like, in college, because it's really important to be resilient, to keep in mind that it's okay and you can like recover.
So thoughts are the way that you think about things, like, oh man, I think I'm gonna do bad on this test. Or if I start getting nervous, like my heart starts beating really fast or I start sweating, that's kind of a physical symptom. And then that might affect how I behave. What's an example of like how your thoughts, behaviors, and physical symptoms like kind of come together?
You first think like, oh my God, I didn't study enough, I'm a fail, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like I start sweating a lot and like my palms are sweating that like I can't even like hold still the pencil. And then like, I actually start forgetting things and I'm like, I studied this, like what's going on? And then like I forget things and then I actually fail.
One of the techniques that we use to combat that cycle is called mindfulness. But being mindful is basically toning into those thoughts that you have and trying to control that environment around you. I wanted her to notice physical symptoms like the hands sweating to kind of manage your thoughts better and say, hey, you know, I'm not unprepared for this test. I have the skills to do it. Then maybe she can try to tell her body to calm down. And then those things will start coming back in her brain.
Many first-generation students are also balancing the guilt of not contributing to their family's income when they're away at school.
You know, you might have a financial struggle, so you should go to work. Or you have siblings, so you need to take care of them before you get to do school. I think those things are hard to let go of when you get here.
And for some, there's the added stress of immigration status. Freshman Jacqueline Tafoya, who is a U.S. citizen, worries that in the current political climate, friends from her home community could be suddenly deported.
And there are millions of families that are struggling, whether it's, you know, having that scary moment where you never know if your family member is going to get deported, or you never know that there can be a moment in your life where one day you're happy with your family sitting at dinner, and the next day your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, you find out you're getting deported. You know, there's like that moment where you know that can happen. So it's very scary. Sorry.
University administrators hope their new focus on mentoring first-generation students will help both students and their families succeed.
We know that our first-gen students within just a few years of graduating are making more than their entire families. We also know that they're tremendous contributors to the state of California, to the economy of California. And it's what higher education is there for, particularly public higher education, is to open those doors of opportunity and to really give meaning to the cliche phrase, the American dream.
In Los Angeles, I'm Hari Srinivasan for the PBS NewsHour.
So that was just a quick little video so you can learn a little bit more about imposter syndrome. I personally really struggled with imposter syndrome. I know the video mentioned feeling a sense of guilt leaving your family, especially if your family does not have the best financial situation and they somewhat depend on you to support them financially. You might feel a sense of guilt. That's exactly what happened to me. So when I was a third year at UC Davis, I really thought about dropping school, taking a year off and not coming back for my fourth year, only because my family was no longer had the income that they were making previously. So I wanted to help them financially, and my way to help them, you know, was to go back home and start working. However, I did talk to a lot of people who really opened my eyes and told me that yes, this is a tough time. However, if you leave, it is so much more difficult to come back as opposed to just sticking it out for 1 year. And what I was going to be making after I graduated was going to be a lot more compared to what I would be making if I had just not finished school and gone to work at fast food or maybe retail. So that really pushed me to stay motivated. And it was tough. I definitely felt a lot of guilt living in Davis, you know, having an apartment, not struggling with food, you know, having a roof over my head, while I was aware that my family back home was struggling with all those factors. So something I also wanted to mention that a lot of students go through, especially their first year, and this could be a cause for them not coming back their second year or not graduating in general, is academic probation. So what academic probation is pretty much a warning telling you that you have fallen into academic difficulty, you haven't been passing your classes, and you need to improve them in order to be back in good standing, and avoid the risk of being disqualified from the university. So, how do you get academic probation? So, you receive academic probation if your term GPA, which is either your semester or your quarter GPA, is between a 1.5 or a 1.9, or your cumulative GPA, which is your GPA from all terms, is lower than a 2.0. And so if your term GPA is poor again the next quarter or semester, but your cumulative stays above a 2.0, you will continue on academic probation. But if your cumulative GPA falls to a 2.0 or your term GPA falls under a 1.5, then your status will change and be subject to disqualification, which means that you can be dropped from the university. So what do you do when you receive academic probation? So the first thing that I would suggest you to do is to talk to someone. So some people you can talk to are your college advisors, your major advisor, your peer advisors, or a counselor. They all have the resources necessary to help you out step by step, especially if it's the first time that you've ever received academic probation. Most schools will also assign you an academic standing assignment, which you should get started after talking to someone. And they pretty much just want to know that you have a plan, to no longer be under academic probation, and that you understand that if you remain on academic probation, that you might be dropped from the school. And lastly is focusing on improving your academic performance next quarter or semester. Because if you remain on academic probation, your cumulative GPA will eventually drop and you will be subject to disqualification. And part of that, also, you have to think about what is causing your academic performance to not be at the level that you know you can be at. So there has to be a different factor, like I mentioned previously. It could be something related to your basic needs. You have housing insecurity, food insecurity. Those might be some of the factors that affect your academic performance. So it's important to get to the root of what is making you struggle academically, get resources to help you in that, which will eventually make your academic performance a lot better. So how to prevent academic probation? So everything that I just mentioned, realizing what root problems you have, and addressing them so that you don't end up being under academic probation. I also should suggest you take a mixture of classes. So don't just be taking all science classes one term and math classes, so really difficult subjects. If they're difficult for you, I don't suggest taking more than 2 at a time. So I would say maybe take biology, take a math class, and take an art class or a writing class, something that you are actually interested in. Don't overwhelm yourself with the number of classes that you take, especially your first year. It's the first time that you're in college. You have only experienced high school, which is the closest thing to college, but you're taking 6 to 7 classes in high school. As opposed to college, you will not be taking as many classes, and I suggest your first term you take 3 classes just to get a feel for what it's like to be in a different environment. I also do want you to keep in mind that you must have 12 units to receive financial aid, and your GPA must be at a 2.0 or better. And lastly, ask for help. So if you know that something is going on and you know it's going to affect your studies, ask for help. And you are going to have a lot of people that you can ask for help, and I will share those people in the next slide. I also wanted to reiterate that if a student is dropped from college, even if it's just for one semester, one term, they only have about a 30% chance of ever coming back and finishing their degrees. So that statistic is very, very low. And It might be for a whole bunch of different reasons, but just remember that it's a lot more difficult to come back than it is to stay in college and just increase your GPA. So here are some resources that I found if you are struggling with any of these topics. So if you're struggling academically, if it's a specific class that you're struggling in, I suggest you go and talk to your professor, talk to the TA. Ultimately, they're the ones who are assigning the work, who are grading the work, and who set the expectations. You can also go to tutoring. All your schools are going to offer free tutoring, and it'll usually be drop-in tutoring. You don't have to even schedule an appointment with someone. You can just stop by, ask a question, head out, or finish doing your work there. They also offer academic advising and counseling, workshops on study skills, time management, public speaking, etc. Some of the workshops, which are like the ones that we've put on here at Upward Bound. If you have any type of disability, if it's a learning disability, physical, psychological disability, make sure to go to the Disability Resource Center because they will work with you in order to make your time in college better and make sure that you have all the resources you need to be successful. And I also have Career Center if you ever are feeling unmotivated for some reason. It's a good idea to go to your Career Center, tell them this is the career I want to go into. They'll talk to you more about it. And in my experience, you will be more motivated after that. You can also do counseling if you're struggling in anything. So all UCs have a mentorship program where they mentor first generation undergraduates. They pair them up with first generation faculty so that they can show you the ropes and show you how to navigate the UC system. There's also a lot of bridge programs that go on during the summers, which their goal is to ease the gap between high school and college. And you can also talk to someone, talk to a counselor, go to counseling because it's not good to keep everything in. You will explode at one point or another. So I suggest you talk to someone, and it doesn't even have to be a licensed counselor, a licensed professional. It can be a family member, it can be a friend. It's just really important to talk to someone. But if you are interested in talking to an actual licensed therapist, a counselor, some schools will have specific community counselors. So I went to UC Davis, and what they had were community counselors that worked with students in from certain populations. So I identify as Latinx, so we had a Latinx community counselor, and I preferred to talk to her only because I knew that she could understand where I was coming from. She understood the Latinx family dynamic, and she could really give me advice that I was able to incorporate. And community counselors, they don't just talk about, mental health. They also help with time management, any academic difficulties. Again, they have all types of resources. They have resources from everything that happens in school. So they are the people to go to if you do need help. And if you are struggling financially, most of your schools will have emergency grants that they will be able to offer you. You can also continue applying for scholarships. So even though you might think that as a senior, this is the only time to apply for scholarships, that is not true. Most scholarships are for seniors, high school seniors, or first year undergraduate students. So you still have time to apply for scholarships, and a lot of your institutions will have their own scholarships, and most of them are merit-based, which means that there is a certain GPA requirement, and they might require a letter of recommendation or not at all. And if you aren't already working, you can also take on a part-time job. I definitely recommend not working more than 20 hours. If you have an on-campus job, they will not allow you to work more than 20 hours. But keep in mind that you already have a full-time job. Your full-time job is going to school and being a student. So if you take on a part-time job, that's a job and a half. And I tell you this from experience. remember when I was talking about my third year, my family was struggling financially. Because I decided to stay at Davis, I was like, you know what? I'm going to work, and I'm going to work a lot to make up for me not being home. So what I did, I already had 2 on-campus jobs. Between those, I worked about 20 hours every single week. And outside of that, I worked at Forever 21, and I would work there 10 to 15 hours. So I would work 30 to almost 40 hours some weeks. And while I was doing that, I was also a full-time student. So I pretty much didn't even have time to eat, barely had time to sleep, didn't really have time to finish all my work. So I definitely struggled in that. It affected my mental health a lot. So I 10 out of 10 do not recommend you do that. But taking a part-time job, working 10 hours a week, it can really help you financially. And food insecurity. So nationally, 43% of students experience food insecurity. Some resources that you can use are CalFresh. Most students, especially if you're first generation low income, will qualify for CalFresh. And what that does is you get money every single month for groceries. Most of your campuses will also have a food pantry where they give out free food. And if you are looking into getting a job, I suggest doing a dining service job, something related with food, because most of the time you'll either get a discount or you will get free food. And if you are struggling in housing, so a statistic I found is that 70% of community college students experience homelessness in the last year, and 50% experience housing insecurity. And that means they didn't know if they could pay their rent next month, they were couch surfing, living in their car. So if you are going to a CSU, 2/3 of CSUs actually offer on-campus emergency housing or vouchers for off-campus housing, and 4 campuses have assistance with long-term housing. If you are going to a UC, they all have basic needs committees. Berkeley specifically has a fund to help students if they need help paying the security deposit for an apartment. And another example is UC San Diego, where they offer basic needs case managers to students who are facing housing instability. And finally, we have Upward Bound. We are always here to support you, even if you are no longer a high school student. We are always here for you. We're a call, text, email away. Anything you need, anything you're struggling in, you can contact us, and we will find someone to help you at your university. And lastly, I did want to show a quick motivational video that I found really interesting, and again, it hits back on the point of imposter syndrome.
So my journey began in the Bronx, New York, in a 1-bedroom apartment with my 2 sisters and immigrant mother. I loved our neighborhood. It was lively. There was always merengue blasting, neighbors socializing on building stoops, and animated conversations over domino playing. It was home, and it was sweet, but it wasn't simple. In fact, everyone at school knew the block where we lived because it was where people came to buy weed and other drugs. And with drug dealing comes conflict, so we often went to sleep to the sound of gunshots. I spent much of my childhood worried about our safety. And so did our mother. She worried that the violence we witnessed would overtake our lives, that our poverty meant that the neighbors with whom we lived and shared space would harm us. Our entire life was in the Bronx, but my mother's anxiety spurred her into action, and soon we were driving so fast to Connecticut, to boarding school campuses with full scholarships in tow. Man, don't underestimate the power of a mother determined to keep her children safe. At boarding school, For the first time, I was able to sleep without worry. I could leave my dorm room unlocked, walk barefoot in the grass, and look up to see a night sky full of stars. Happy novelties. But there were other novelties as well. Very quickly, I felt like I didn't belong. I learned that I didn't speak the right way, and to demonstrate the proper ways of speaking, my teachers gave me frequent lessons in public on the appropriate way to enunciate certain words. A teacher once instructed me in the hallway, asking. She said this loudly. Dina, it's not axing like you're running around with an axe. That's silly. Now, at this point, you could imagine the snickers of my classmates. But she continued. Think about breaking the word into ass and king, and then put the two together to say it correctly. Asking. There were some other moments that reminded me that I didn't belong. Once, I walked into a classmate's dorm room, and I watched her watch her valuables around me. Like, why would she do that? Thought to myself. And then there was the time when another classmate walked into my dorm room and yelled, "Ew," as I was applying hair grease to my scalp. There is emotional damage done when young people can't be themselves, when they are forced to edit who they are in order to be acceptable. It's a kind of violence. Ultimately, I'm a quintessential success story. I attended boarding school and college in New England, studied abroad in Chile, and returned to the Bronx to be a middle school teacher. I received a Truman Scholarship, a Fulbright, and a Soros Fellowship, and I could list more. But I won't. I earned my doctorate at Columbia University. And then I landed a job at Yale. I am proud of everything that I've been able to accomplish on my journey thus far. I have eternal imposter syndrome. Either I've been invited because I'm a token, which really isn't about me, but rather about a box someone needed to check off. Or I'm exceptional, which means I've had to leave the people I love behind. It's the price that I and so many others pay for learning while Black. I police myself all the time. Are my pants too tight? Should I wear my hair up or in a fro? Should I speak up for myself, or will the power of my words be reduced to, she's angry? Why did I have to leave the Bronx to gain access to a better education? And why, in the process of getting that better education, did I have to endure the trauma of erasing what made me me? A Black girl from the Bronx raised by an Antiguan mother. So when I think about our current education reform initiatives, I can't help asking, what are our students of color learning about themselves? Three decades of research reveal that students of color are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white students, and are punished in harsher ways for the same infractions. They also learn this through the absence of their lives and narratives in the curricula. the Cooperative Children's Book Center did a review of nearly 4,000 books and found that only 3% were about African Americans. And they further learned this through the lack of teachers that look like them. An analysis of data from the National Center for Education Statistics found that 45% of our nation's pre-K to high school students were people of color, while only 17% of our teachers are. Our youth of color pay a profound price when their schooling sends them the message that they must be controlled, that they must leave their identities at home in order to be successful. Every child deserves an education that guarantees the safety to learn in the comfort of one's own skin. It is possible to create emotionally and physically safe classrooms where students also thrive academically. I know because I did it in my classroom when I returned to teach in the Bronx. So what did that look like? I centered my instruction on the lives, histories, and identities of my students. And I did all of this because I wanted my students to know that everyone around them was supporting them to be their best self. So while I could not control the instability of their homes, the uncertainty of their next meal, or the loud neighbors that kept them from sleep, I provided them with a loving classroom that made them feel proud of who they are, that made them know that they mattered. You know, every time I hear or say the word asking, I'm in high school again. I'm thinking about ass and king and putting the two together so that I speak in a way where someone in power will want to listen. There's a better way, one that doesn't force kids of color into a double bind, a way for them to preserve their ties to their families, homes, and communities, a way that teaches them to trust their instincts and to have faith in their own creative genius. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that video. It was really motivational for me personally, but I did want to end on this note in giving you some reminders that you deserve every accomplishment you have made thus far and that I know you will continue to make. You deserve to succeed. You are not a box checked off. You have people who care about you. You will make it, and I promise you, sometimes you're gonna feel like it's not worth it, but I promise you, the struggle is definitely worth it. So again, if you ever need any help, feel free to contact your college advisor, contact anyone on staff. We're always here for you.